Good evening and welcome to SSUC Online. As we pause with one another on this Good Friday evening, a time to gather in twilight, as day gives way to night, as shadows lengthen and evening comes. Together, we face into the darkness of our time, remembering the shadows in the stories of our tradition that give us this day, acknowledging the pain and suffering of the world in the midst of this pandemic, and amid all that has brought harm to the earth and all its inhabitants. We're together in this way, in a Good Friday world, seeking wisdom in the stories that give us this tradition. We are here to do what we can, to light a candle rather than curse the darkness, which is no small thing, to befriend fear, anger, guilt, grief, gratitude, and hope. All that this time holds, and to open, to live into what this time asks of us. If you'd like, we invite you to have 4 candles ready to light with us in a few moments. Wherever you are tonight, on whatever ancestral lands that have witnessed the best and worst of our humanity, wounded lands that weep of betrayal and belittlement of many of its earliest inhabitants, generous lands that many of us, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, call home by so many different names, yet with our common hopes and dreams. Wherever you are tonight in the spectrum of emotions that accompany us in this time, this is a time to reach out of our isolation, to be with one another in silence, in ritual, in reflection, and in music. A time to breathe together in our place, knowing that we are not alone in the weight of this time. We breathe the same air our ancestors breathed, and the same air that will give life to those who come after us. Let's give our attention to our breath as we take this time to center in music that Pam and Janet and Dawn offer to us.
The story of Good Friday embraces so many of the realities of our lives. It's not just the cruel death of a first-century visionary and teacher in Jesus of Nazareth. It's a story that pierces us with its violence in the cruel power of an empire that seeks to silence a critic, and the contagious nature of fear, where even friends can flee. It's a story of grief, a mother helpless to rescue her son, and heartbroken friends. It's a story of compassion, as the dying one seeks to connect his mother to a beloved friend and entrust each other to their care. It's a story of resilience in the power to forgive those who harm and to nurture a culture of gentleness and kindness, where we treat one another in the ways we wish to be treated. Tonight remembers in story and in song all the raw terror and the wondrous beauty of our lives. We revisit it tonight for the valuable teaching it offers in our time of fear, in our time of grief, in our time of compassion, and in our time of resilience.
The story Good Friday remembers is filled with fear. Fearful followers abandon their teacher in his final hours. They're afraid the authorities will arrest and execute them as well. It must have seemed that everything they had given their lives to had come crashing down around them in utter failure. They thought the golden days of a new social order were dawning, and the empire would be toppled. But instead, the brute force of Roman power was bearing down on them and would soon scatter them into hiding behind locked doors. A lockdown. This is a time of fear around the world, as we witness the vulnerability and insecurity that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to our global community. There are so many fears for health, for economic stability and security, for shelter, for safety, for life itself. The unknowns of how long and how much longer, how many and how many more. In the presence of whatever we fear tonight, wherever you are, we invite you to light a candle with us, to light a candle in the midst of all we fear. As we hold this space with one another, knowing that fear has also been one of the things that has helped us survive as a species. We face our fears, seeking to learn its teaching and seeking to be present to its truth.
The story of Good Friday is also a story of grief. As the women and men who called Jesus their friend and teacher witnessed him being arrested, led through the streets of Jerusalem, and ultimately tortured and killed outside of the city, they felt that same pain with him. Whether it was his disciples who went into hiding for fear of their own lives, or whether it was the women of the story who were with him every moment, the pain of grief is front and center in this story. There's much grief in our world right now. For many, illness and death are all around. We weep for the pain and the grief that most are or will be touched by the loss that a pandemic creates. Lives are being lost, families broken and devastated, loved ones being cut off from us by distance, by quarantine, by lockdown. In the presence of all that we grieve for tonight, we invite you to light a candle with us, to light a candle for all we grieve, and for all those who grieve. We hold this space with one another, knowing that, like the community of women who wept for their dying and dead friend, we also are not alone in our grieving.
The story Good Friday remembers is also graced with moments of compassion. One of the details the first century storytellers relate is a moment of compassion and connection. The storytellers give us this glimpse of Jesus entrusting his mother to a beloved friend and follower, entrusting them into one another's care. The storyteller has him address his mother, "Woman, behold your son," pointing to his friend. And to his friend, "Behold your mother," pointing to Mary. You are now family to one another. This is an expression of care for those who will be most brokenhearted by his death. The storyteller makes them family to one another. From that time on, the beloved friend took Mary into his own home and treated her as his own mother. It also expresses forgiveness for those who are harming him. Rather than speaking threats or inciting violence or inviting retaliation, the story has him forgive his executioners for not knowing what they're doing. These details are not about happenings in history, but they are about inspiring us with glimpses of our highest humanity. This is a time of great compassion for victims of a non-discriminating virus devastating families around the world. A time of compassion for those who are doing their very best to provide essential services and goods of all kinds to enable many of us to stay out of circulation. We have seen remarkable and inspiring acts of compassion, alongside creative acts of solidarity, expressing gratitude, and even bringing moments of joy. So, in the presence of the particular circumstances of this night, those circumstances that are stirring within our own hearts and stirring us to compassion, we invite you to light a candle for all that moves your heart to open and deepen the compassion of which we are capable as the human expressions of life. And we hold this space to honor the capacity for the many expressions of compassion.
The story of Good Friday is a story of resilience. Although fear and grief surrounded those who were left behind, there were those who did everything they could when circumstances required it. Joseph of Arimathea, not a famous name, but one that's remembered as one who took it upon himself to retrieve Jesus' body, who purchased the linens to wrap it, and attended to the burial arrangements. There were those in this story who, when they found the strength, they came out of their locked rooms and they continued to teach what they'd learned, keeping their leaders' movement going. Today, we don't have to look very far to see videos, and we're sharing posts and we're reading stories of people doing what they can to love their neighbor, feeding and clothing those that need it, comforting those suffering, visiting those that are most alone and isolated in new technological and safe ways. We are all able to live the ethic of doing what we can. We are each inspired to recover from our self-interests and to thrive in helping and in serving and in offering ourselves for the good of others. In the presence of all we know of resilience, we invite you to light a candle with us, to light a candle for those who are leading the way and inspiring us in our times. And we hold this space with one another, encouraged to find strength in each other and within ourselves, knowing that our species, our community, our own stories give us all we need to endure and to thrive. Tonight we've lit 4 candles for 4 themes that come to us in tonight's story, but also that have particular relevance to our current living: fear, grief, compassion, and resilience. But these aren't the only lights that we need in our lives. We invite you to ponder a question right now. What other candles do we need to light with one another tonight? What value, what character, what ethic are you most in need of just now? We're inviting you to participate with us, to respond to us in the next few moments. And there are 2 ways that you're seeing right now that you can do that. You can text us at the number there, 780-200-8286. Or you can email us at chris@smsuc.com. If you do that in the next 2, 3, 4 minutes or so, we'll be able to include your responses and we'll share them together in a few moments. So ponder that question and respond to us. What other candles do we need to light tonight as lights in our world and in our lives?
These are the words of the poet May Sarton in a poem entitled Santos, New Mexico. Return. Return to the deep sources. Nothing less will teach the stiff hands a new way to serve, to carve into our lives the forms of tenderness, and still that ancient necessary pain preserve. We must go down into the dungeons of the heart, to the dark places where modern minds imprison all that is not defined and thought apart. We must let out the terrible, creative visions. Return to the most human. Nothing less will teach the angry spirit, the bewildered heart, the torn mind, to accept the whole of its duress. And pierced with anguish, at last, act for love. In these words, may we find wisdom for being light in the darkness of our time. We sing with one another tonight a song of hope that comes to us from the words of Jim Strathy. You'll find the words on the screen. I invite you to sing where you are with us as we express and seek what it is we need this night.
We contemplate this day and the meaning it has for our lives, we light one more candle to symbolize all of these ways that we are lights together and in need of it and still seeking it. Into this night we go, but we go with the candles of our best intentions and the best of our humanity, We go with the wisdom of the ages, of the sages, and the wisdom of each other. May these lights represent only a glimmer of what shines within us, allowing us to feel deeply, to encourage heartily, and to persevere courageously. Into this good night we bid you health and wholeness, and wish you good night.